And to our discussion segment, Nigeria's inflation rate reached a new high in June 2024, with the headline inflation rate climbing to 34.19%, up from 33.35% in May 2024. Of particular concern is the surge in food inflation, which reached a staggering 40.87% in June. These figures paint a worrisome picture of the challenges facing the country's economy and the impact of the daily lives of Nigerians. Today on The Conversation, we will be looking at the underlying factors driving the inflation, efforts by the federal government to stabilize food prices, as well as explore potential solutions to address this pressing economic issue. Our guest is an economist, Mr. Kelvin Emmanuel. You're welcome to Business Express.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I believe you must have seen the figures, and most Nigerians are not actually smiling. And what worry most Nigerians today is food inflation, and at more than 40% is one of the highest in the world. I've seen the data. Now, how do we navigate through this? We've seen efforts by the Central Bank of Nigeria, which is actually not enough, and we realize that the fiscal authorities need to do need to do more as well. And, well, how do we navigate this before we look at a picture of how to address this?
Well, you know, I find that the issue about food inflation is not looked at it from a systematic point of view. For example, I'm of the view that insecurity is a major cause of food production output decline in Nigeria. And the view that I've not seen the National Security Council look at, because food security is now part of the National Security Council basket, is the impact of bandit tax and the impact of illegal mining and the illegal, militia that secures the territory for illegal miners, and the bandit tax they place on smallholder farmers on food security in the North Central, in the Northwest, and in the Northeast. So maybe that's an area where the National Security Council needs to look at. Then we also have the issue of the increase in price of fertilizer. You can see that NPK has gone up from like 4,000 or 5,000 naira 4 or 5 years ago. It's gone up to about 40,000 naira per bag. And when you look at NPK, nitrogen, Nigeria has ammonium nitrate gas. It's one of the gas feedstock that is delivered to gas-based industry. I think it's currently at $2.49 per standard cubic feet to gas-based industries, GBIs, the domestic base price. Nigeria doesn't have potassium, it doesn't have phosphates, so it has to import potassium and phosphates. It gets potassium from, it was getting it from Eastern Europe, from Ukraine and Russia, and then the whole issue started in the Black Sea. And then it also now gets from Canada. So you need backward integration for potassium. You also need backward integration for phosphates to produce diammonium phosphate fertilizers, DAP, and to blend NPK. That way you can bring down the prices of fertilizer, because fertilizer is a major component. Then you have about 48, 49 agricultural research institutes under the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development. The question I have to ask the government is, why is FAMAD not increasing the allocation and changing the management and leadership of these institutions to improve on the crops? Now, on the plan of the government to set up a separate Ministry of Livestock, I think is not relevant, because animal husbandry covers livestock development, as it's supposed to be under FAMAD. If the output or the KPIs are not being met for food production in Nigeria, then you should look at the leadership of FAMAD. So you have, for example, a situation where, for example, for maize, Nigeria produces about 22 million metric tons a year, but it needs about 30 million metric tons a year. And you see the output, there's a shortage of about 7 to 8 million metric tons a year. And maize goes into cereal, it goes into maize flour, it goes into animal feeds, especially poultry feeds, and you can see that the price of chicken and eggs have skyrocketed.
Yeah,
I think it's about the highest in Lagos.
I think in places like Lagos, it's around 5,000 naira.
Exactly, it's even more.
And here, I think it's around close to that.
Exactly. So you can see the impact of that on the staples that Nigerians consume on a daily basis. And the fact that we don't produce enough maize, the temporary solution of like creating a 150-day window to bring
now,
in...
150-day window. You
Yes.
just started the conversation.
It's
I would like you to look at what we have on the screen. If you may give us the taming food inflation, and you can see around this is actually the plan, 180 days quick win plan. And the federal government is saying that it's planning to import 250,000 metric tons of wheat, and also maize that you talked about.
Well, I don't think importing 250,000 metric tons of wheat and maize is a solution to the problem. Nigeria currently has the Flour Mills Association of Nigeria, FAMAN, that is in partnership with the Central Bank and the Ministry of Finance, I think, and developing backward integration for wheat in Nigeria. Nigeria consumes about 7 million metric tons of wheat on a yearly basis, valued at about $5 billion worth of imports. And Nigeria currently produces anywhere around 260,000 metric tons of wheat locally.
So you
need those numbers to go up.
Yeah, looking at the numbers, you are saying that this won't make much impact.
It won't make much because the country consumes 7 million metric tons on a yearly basis. As a matter of fact, in 1989, Nigeria, when General IBB had banned importation of wheat from the US, Nigeria was producing about 550,000 metric tons of wheat. So in 40 years, in 35 years, we've had deceleration in terms of production output. And the way to go about solving this problem is we have to focus on irrigation, we have to focus on fertilizer, we have to focus on seed variety that actually produces higher yield per hectare. We have to focus on mechanization. This is an issue that is not talked about a lot because currently as we speak.
Some of the things you just mentioned there, you can see on mechanization, they are trying to be aggressive towards mechanization to boost productivity. Then you also talked about dry season farming. Dry season farming, very important. But how long does it take to achieve all this? For me, it takes a long time. Well, we need a quick fix right now.
Well, the quick fix is import. But then the question you have to ask is at what exchange rate are you going to import? Considering that a lot of people are not able to secure from EMS, even with cash cover today from banks. How soon can you get that? And at what exchange rate are you going to import? Now, removing the taxes and levies is good. Yeah, it's a palliative that is going to. But the president also has to remove the restriction that grants import licenses to only a few companies for maize, for sugar, for milk. You know, there were restrictions that was placed by the immediate past president. The president has to remove it and liberalize the markets. You know, but the long-term work.
You talked about restriction. Are we talking about the ban list, the CBN ban list, which they have lifted?
No, I'm not talking about.
Or is it
there is an import restriction on milk. Okay. There's an import restriction on sugar. Only 3 companies have the license to import sugar into Nigeria under the guise that they will follow the National Sugar Master Plan, which has not been followed until now. The president needs to remove that import restriction on sugar. He also has to remove the import restriction on maize. Now, to allow the market, liberalize the market, allow the market to compete and find its forward call for price.
Okay, imported commodities to be subject to recommended retail price is actually part of the plan. Could this be a price control thing, or how can it be sustainable?
I don't think price control is sustainable anywhere in the world because the market follows the principle of willing buyer, willing seller.
So what do we do about greedy middlemen?
It is what the market is. Whenever you create a gap, whenever there's a gap between demand and supply, you always have players come to take advantage of that gap. It's not something you can control. What you can control is improve supply. That's the way to bring the market, correct the market. The market corrects itself. You don't need to set up an agency of government that goes around regulating price. It doesn't work.
But these are unlikely times.
They are unlikely times, but the question you have to ask is how many people can possibly man an ombudsman or a regulator that is going from shop to shop or supermarket to supermarket and trying to regulate the price of
But actually what we are saying is even if there should be increase, it should not be more than a certain percentage. But this, in most cases, is just
what I think the government needs to focus on. For example, before this 150, 180-day window was created, on wheat you had a levy of around 15%, if I'm not mistaken. On sugar, you had a levy of 30%, backward integration levy. What it needs to focus on is to use those levies and accelerate the process of ensuring that you can bring in completely knocked down parts for tractors and its attachments to assemble here, remove the duties and levies on it. It needs to focus on research and development for biodiesel as an alternative diesel, because diesel prices are a major input in the cost of production and in the cost of transportation. The government needs to realize that transportation is a major input in food inflation, in transporting food from the south to the north and from the north to the south. So how it goes is usually raw materials goes from the north to the south. Finished products goes from the south to the north. Now, if you focus on cargo rail, because 90% of transportation goes through roads today, and you have about 4,331 kilometers of railway lines across Nigeria that is not functioning for cargo transportation. We focus on increasing the vertical and horizontal network for rail infrastructure to reduce the dependence on roads. The cost of transportation for food will reduce, and the time will also reduce. That's what the government needs to focus on. It needs to focus on fertilizer, it needs to focus on seeds, it needs to focus on mechanization, it needs to focus on transportation, it needs to provide feedstock for the commercial refiner in Nigeria to be able to refine diesel in Nigeria to supply the market and stabilize the price.
What role should CBN, what role should they take in this?
The central bank?
Looking at this development, we've seen periods of tightening monetary policy rates. So what role should they take with this development?
I don't agree with the people who have said that the CBN should stop raising rates, because the Monetary Policy Committee has to always follow what they call the yield curve differential, the inflation to interest yield curve. If inflation continues up, this when MPC has to raise the rates. It always has to stay within a 400 basis point band. So what you need to do is work on decelerating inflation and ensuring that it's reached its peak so that the MPC will not keep raising rates. On the issue of development finance, I think it was the right decision of Cardozo to reduce the activities of the DFD and focus on orthodox monetary policy, because we've seen how the Anchor Borers program and all such interventions played out, even if it contributed greatly in improving the level of production for rice paddy for rice milling in Nigeria, which has achieved 57%.
But to say this, people like Dangote and the rest of manufacturers would not agree with you, because tightening monetary policy rate is actually hurting a lot of manufacturing companies out there.
The consequence of the ways and means, 30.6 trillion naira of ways and means, 17.3 trillion which came from quantitative easing, is what you have for money supply in the economy and for inflation that you've seen today, which is cost push inflation. The central bank is trying to contain it. So I don't think the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria should blame the MPC for trying to contain the situation we have on ground today. Because if you reduce interest rates while inflation keeps going up, what you're going to see is you're going to see a capital flight from Naira to US dollar denominated assets. And you're just going to see that exchange rate effect on the inflation keep rising. Okay. And it's going to be a vicious cycle.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Kelvin Emmanuel. In fact, it's a pleasure having you. We look forward to having you again in our studio.
Thank you so much for having me.